The Jedi, the servants and protectors of peace within the Republic. Why did they really fall, and what does this reveal to us about human nature? Just a quick reminder to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel greatly. Now, back to the video. The Jedi aren't explicitly religious figures of the Republic. However, their doctrine and way of life echo a number of real religions. One interesting dimension to the Jedi philosophy that I want to explore in this video is the light side of the Force versus the dark side. In essence, good versus evil, which alludes to some Christian motifs. Now, the Jedi had every reason to be wary of the dark side of the Force. As we see throughout the story, the Sith are a destructive and terrifying presence in the galaxy, and when Darth Vader rises to power, he shrouds the galaxy in fear and domination. With this in mind, the reality of evil has to be contended with, and the Jedi know this. So why do they fall? Well, first let's look at Jung's concept of the shadow, the feared and repressed parts of the psyche within an individual and collective. In the last video, I went into the perspective of the Sith and the dark side being a symbol of the shadow. Therefore, the Jedi's rigidity and clear-cut rejection of it could be understood as a type of maintained repression of the shadow, which allowed it to fester and grow unseen in the Republic, in the form of Darth Sidious. However, the Jedi's commitment to serve the Force and focus on the light, I believe, points to something vital. In fact, this is one of the main areas of the Jedi philosophy that echoes Christianity. Christianity takes a very clear stance that there is such a thing as good and evil, and that there is a spiritual war happening between them. Jung seemed to share this notion that good and evil are very real, and that each of us have a moral responsibility to differentiate between them on our journeys of development. You see, when Jung talked about integrating the shadow, he wasn't suggesting that we simply embrace or indulge the darker aspects of our nature. He was actually addressing the fact that what remains unconscious can influence an individual and collective in a far greater way than what is conscious. Therefore, the more one becomes conscious of themselves, the more awareness they have of their behavior, as well as feeling more complete and balanced as an individual. With this in mind, the Jedi, being a symbol of the light, can also be understood as that which is conscious, illuminated, as well as the more moral symbol of that which is good. But these two ideas actually align. You see, when one confronts the shadow, the truth is they don't know what they will find. The shadow is simply that which is repressed and feared. Therefore, there could be qualities in the shadow that are actually positive and redeemable. However, inevitably, there will also be genuinely dark traits. It's this very fact that reintroduces the moral component of light and dark, good and evil. One must maintain their moral integrity while facing the shadow and decide from that place what is appropriate to integrate. Therefore, the Jedi's warnings were warranted and appropriate. They understood that one can lose themselves to the dark side, the shadow. When one loses themselves to the shadow, that is when the archetypal gates to evil open. The individual no longer has the conscious control they once did. They have lost their point of reference and are consumed by their repressed selves, including the dangerous aspects. Anakin is a great example of this. Anakin always had an edge to him. He first grew up in harsh abusive conditions as a slave before beginning his Jedi training. He was naturally very gifted and grew rapidly in skill and ability. He wanted recognition and respect from the Jedi for this, but they often withheld it. This only compelled him to become stronger. This desire to be powerful was also largely perpetuated by his fear of loss. First, Anakin loses his mother and blames himself for not being powerful enough to stop her from dying. Then when he feels Padmé's impending doom, his fear drives him to seek more power to try and stop her death at any cost. So there is a number of different traits playing out simultaneously. On the one hand, there is a genuine fear of loss and a sincere desire to prevent this. On the other hand, there is a young man who spent the first years of life being completely powerless and abused. Therefore, naturally, there was a desire to compensate for these painful feelings of helplessness when he suddenly developed his Jedi powers. His fear of loss merged with his need to compensate for his young feelings of powerlessness. While it appears the Jedi contributed to their own downfall by their repression and avoidance of the shadow, which was demonstrated by their unawareness of Darth Sidious, their caution around it is still very important. If Anakin had been guided through his pain and learned to integrate his shadow, he would have recognized that lurking in the depths of him was a murderous desire for power to compensate for his childhood pain. If Anakin had been able to identify this very dark, looming potential within his unconscious mind while he was still the Anakin committed to the light, he could have learned to humbly be mindful of it. He would have realized that he himself could easily cause that which he fears the most. This in turn would have most likely led him to pursue the virtues of the light more deeply while consciously knowing the darkness within. Part of integrating the shadow is embracing the repressed traits that are actually positive and repurposing those that have been misused. The parts of the shadow that are too dangerous to integrate into the personality are to be mindfully tracked by the individual so that they are not blindsided or hijacked by it. But in order to make these differentiations, one must have a clear sense of right and wrong, good and evil. This, in essence, is the moral responsibility that Jung spoke to during the process of integration. This moral responsibility appears to be influenced by Christian ideas that the battle between good and evil is playing out in the world and within every person, something the Jedi often speak to. Good and evil have to be contended with whether we like it or not, because the potential for both of them are all too real in each of us and in the world. I think part of what makes Jung's insight so profound is that he took that ancient cosmic idea and saw it playing out in the depths of each of us. Although that being said, the principle of looking inward was around long before Jung. However, he went to great lengths to articulate it psychologically. So if we look at the Jedi, their flaw was subtle but profound. Their focus on the light was necessary, but they clung to it and avoided the dark. They needed to bring the light to the dark, the conscious to unconscious. In that process of investigating the shadow, they needed to maintain their moral compass of what is good and right, redeeming that which they find to be good and becoming aware of that which is dangerous. Something we must all do on our own heroic journeys if we are to become the individuals we were destined to be. You've been watching Archetypal Wisdom. Remember to like and subscribe. Stay wise.